and welcome to the Today Show. I'm your host, Christopher Power. Our guest today is Bilal Vakani from Canada Talks on Sirius XM channel 167. So stay tuned. Bilal, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I can call you Chris, right? Because you said Christopher, and I'm like, oh, I've been underselling you all this time.
You can call me Chris or Christopher, whichever you like, for sure.
Awesome. So, Christopher, please begin.
You know, I heard something about you, and this is going to be my first question I'm going to ask you. Talk to me about the Diversity Council that you founded or co-founded with SiriusXM. Is that right?
So I was the first programming member. I can't. I'm a founding member, right? Like that's how it goes. Somebody else had the idea, and basically what happened was, we're all familiar with the story of George Floyd, and it's so traumatic. I try not to think about it specifically because it's disturbing. But at that moment, like a lot of people, SiriusXM Canada did some soul searching. The American side of the company, I think, is a bit further ahead in that regard. They're sort of on the ground with it a bit more than we are in Canada. And somebody else kind of came up with the idea of this council, and there were open nominations from all departments, all backgrounds to sort of come in, and I was the one person from programming who was part of that council. And the early stages of it were so basic as where are we, what is even the makeup of our staff, and what do we need to address. And we did a lot of internal studies, internal education. We brought a lot of guest speakers in, and I have colleagues who actually continue to do that, because at a certain point I stepped away just because I had more responsibility. So I have another member of the programming team who's jumped in there, and some of the stuff we came away with was so shocking. Even the hiring rates, right? Like, if you're somebody like me, and for lack of a better term, you're not white, your hiring rate in Canada is about 10% less than someone who's a white male. And that it seems so hard to grasp, because it can be completely subconscious, right? It cannot be malicious. It cannot be intended. It could just be, the person who runs the company likes golfing, and you didn't have a background that makes you, part of that culture. So you're not the guy on the golf course. And then even when you get into a corporation like SiriusXM, maybe you're not the person who does that or is on the company softball team, and or it's harder for you to network. And I think it was such an educational process. And there's so many, different facets to it, and we're still learning and growing. But it certainly, emboldened me in terms of my journey, because at the same time, I sort of made a transition from doing a daily show with a co-host to doing my own show, the Bilal Vakani Hour, on Canada Talks. And while I was learning all this stuff, I simultaneously became the first person of color to do a show on that channel. And I had to sort of decide along with my bosses, is this all going to be about diversity? And the interesting thing was, my reaction was no, because I'm still a regular person like any other Canadian in this country who just wants to talk about the things I'm passionate about. But my perspective and my ability to go after those issues, um, is heightened, not even so much because of my background, but because I had access to tools from SiriusXM Canada and experts, where I now recognize how my background, how it fits into the greater picture of Canada. And I'll stop there, otherwise this is going to become a TED talk. But it really widened, not just my eyes, but basically everyone in our organization.
Well, Balani talk for sure. So talk to me about your show, Canada Talks. What can we expect when we tune in? You know, we dial into Sirius XM 167. We grab Canada Talks. We got the Bilal Vakani Hour. What am I listening to?
So I'll go broad on the channel, right? Because like I'm pretty great, but I work with Peter Mansbridge, who a lot of people will remember from the National. So every morning I wake up, Peter every weekday's got a brand new podcast. We air that at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern, and it's Peter. He's got Chantel Hebert, he's got Bruce Anderson, he's got a lot of the people you know and remember from his panels on the National at issue, which a lot of us watched. But then Peter will actually on Thursdays just take listener email. And you could imagine when Peter Mansbridge puts his email address out there, he gets email from all over, not just the country, but the world. And he's taken basically a podcast he started during the pandemic and he's transitioned it to a Sirius XM show. We have Bob McCowan and John Shannon who do the Bob McCowan podcast. I work with them as well. And, they just the other day, they had the owner of the Dallas Stars, who's, this great Vancouver boy was just waiting, just bugging Gary Bettman for the right opportunity to own a team in the NHL. And that was just yesterday's show. So we have those two names along with, a daily lineup, which I couldn't possibly all plug them all at this time. And then also, Amber Mack, Eric Alper, people who are, whether it's tech, whether it's music, sort of top of their field. So the Canada Talks channel is this great cross section of all these different experts and opinionators and journalists. And then we also have a bunch of sports, the majority of Raptor games, a bunch of NHL. I could go on and on, but it's kind of your one-stop shop for Canadian talks and a bit of sports programming on Sirius XM. So when you need a break from Howard Stern or our American friends, we're there for you.
Wonderful. I like that little drop. Yeah, Howard Stern. So you're a senior host, is that correct?
So, well, I feel old now. So senior producer of podcast operations. I guess I'm more of a junior host because this is always such a weird thing and I'm not even sure if I agree with what I just said. This industry is so fluid, right? So I started a decade ago at TSN 1050 and I was predominantly a producer, but after a few years, they made me the Jays fan reporter and I always submitted on air stuff and I always had on air stuff play. And then after about 5 years, and I also worked at TSN Sports Center, but we don't talk about that. After about 5 years, I went to Sirius XM, and within a few months, I became one of the anchors for their Scoreboard channel, which is a sports update channel we run. MLB Network Radio, the official Sirius XM channel of Major League Baseball, has also contracted me out as a reporter. So I can't say I'm a senior host because reporting and hosting, as you well know, are sort of different fields. But I'm certainly the senior producer of podcast operations, and I guess I would say medium, average experienced host, depending on how we categorize the various reporting and different things I've done over the years.
So how did you get involved with Sirius XM? Is there, you go to their career page and say, hey, here I am, I want to do it. Like, walk me through how that whole application process for you,
Mhm.
for Sirius XM, and where you are today. How did that journey look?
So for me, it's very, very different because I was at TSN 1050. It actually ties into the TSN thing. So I had tried to work at Sports Center as a writer because I had some connections there, and it didn't work. After 3 months, they said just go back and do radio. And when I came and I was doing radio throughout it, but essentially I was working at both. I was working at TSN 1050 and I was working at TSN Sports Center as a writer for about 3 to 4 months. I was doing both jobs. And because of that, I did very, very little on the radio side, and I was predominantly doing the television. But when the television thing ended, I refocused on the radio. I did a little bit of shadowing to kind of re up my skills. And because of that initiative I showed at the time, they asked me to work with some fill in hosts. And one of the fill in hosts was a Sirius XM personality, and it's a long story. But they essentially advocated for me to come over. And when I came over, sort of in an operator's role, I also kind of became the producer and then I started doing the interviews. Then I started doing the sports updates. Then I started doing sports broadcasts. Then I started doing music shows. Then and it just kept going and going and going. But it's sort of a non-traditional path because of everyone we've brought in since, that hasn't happened again. Typically, we have a couple of colleges and universities we work with, and through those relationships, we have interns. I have one who interned with me, got hired after the intern, and now he operates about half of our lineup, our live lineup on Canada Talks, and he's a great young man. And then we also have sort of those open applications. If you go to SiriusXM.ca and you go down through the careers page, there will be sort of rotating internships and positions as they open up. I think recently we added a Mixtape North, which is a hip hop channel. So we were sort of hiring for that and a variety of music positions on a programming level. Um, But obviously these, the difference between running a music channel and being an intern is, arguably a gap of about a decade of experience. So opportunities will vary based on availability. But there are stories of people who started in accounting or in other departments and actually transitioned into the programming department. So there's many roads that kind of can lead you to that programming department, and mine was one of the more unusual, I would say.
Wonderful. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
All about inclusion and really giving everyone a fair say.
Welcome to the Today Show. This is our flagship show. I am Unstoppable Tracy.
I am Zach Damon.
It is a pleasure to be here. I am excited. What is up?
We have a great show today.
Jay Stoyan here for the Disability Channel, the world's only inclusive channel for and by persons with disabilities.
Get ready to be inspired, everyone.
We have people watching from all over the world, but also all over Ontario.
We also take a concerted attention in the veterans community.
In moments of stress and trauma, we can get a hold of ourselves.
To help make a difference for people with disabilities, to show people how to love themselves or their disability.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys having me, giving this platform for myself and other people with disabilities.
Thank you so much, folks, for joining us for this episode of the Disability Channel Detroit. Please tune in next time.
Welcome back to the Today Show. With us today is Bilal Vakani from Sirius XM channel 167. So, question for you. You were talking about the hip hop channel. Now, if I'm not mistaken, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Sirius XM has actually launched a whole hip hop dedicated channel now. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it's a big deal because we are known for The Verge, which is an alt rock channel. We have North Americana, which is sort of a mix of a couple genres. We have Top of the Country, and we had an opportunity to bring in a new channel. And what made the most sense to the people a lot smarter than me, I just kind of helped them put a lot of the hip hop. I helped them put in, I think, 500 of the hip hop tracks. So that was a lot of my life for a long time. But essentially, somebody much smarter than me said, look, there's a genre of music we haven't serviced. And, I was watching The Voice with my wife the other night, and there's not exactly a hip hop judge on there as well. And this is a genre, especially in Canada. While we were going through this process, I got to interview Akon, who's the great hip hop artist. And when I brought up Canadian hip hop, and I can't repeat exactly what he said because he swore, but essentially, he started listing off Drake, he started listing off The Weeknd, and all these other great Canadians he worked with. And a lot of that genre, Canada has got such a rich history in. So, when you go out, and I think it was Mastermind who built the playlist, and you try try to pick 500, 1,000 songs to build just the start of a channel with, it was such a diverse list of those big names, which were probably already playing somewhere on Sirius XM in the US. But then, a lot of us will think of something like Six Buzz as just this weird thing on Instagram where we get, clickbaity stories. But they do like hip hop music and collaborations, which are pretty damn good, I found out. So it's a genre that's just growing and growing and growing. And it was, normally when somebody says you've got to sit there and you've got to bring in 500 tracks to a channel, it's a pretty tedious process. But to actually learn a lot about these artists and listen to a lot of the music, and I probably listened to it more than I should have because the main purpose was to put the music in the system, not to listen to it. It was a really cool experience. And, this is a 24-hour channel that's going to probably have a different song almost every time you tune in. So I highly recommend people check it out. I don't even remember the channel number off the top of my head, but if you go into the SiriusXM app, you type in Mixtape North, you're going to find it. And It's really, really cool. And I know we have some free trials that I think are just around the corner. So, if you keep an eye for those, you can basically check it out for free.
That's awesome. I have a question for you, and you and I were kind of chatting about this. I'm going to surprise you with this one. With SiriusXM, now a lot of the newer vehicles get SiriusXM on a trial basis and things like this. Is there a specific car or manufacturer that doesn't already have SiriusXM in there that perhaps we could kind of look at in the future saying, Ford, GM, all these guys have it. This guy doesn't. Who is that guy?
It's Tesla, and we all know Elon Musk, so it's not a big surprise. I think he has his own, and I don't understand this. He has his own entertainment suite, which I can't really tell you what's on it because my dad has a Tesla. I got in it and I looked at it, and I'm like, I don't know what any of these things are, but it might be good. I don't know. But the good thing is, we live in this Apple CarPlay, Android Auto world where, if you're a SiriusXM subscriber, just make sure you have the app set up and you can use your app in the car and you can have access to it. It is an extra little bit of work, and I had that experience with my dad where, um, but it was sort of gratifying in a way because he basically would text me and would say something like, I love this new car, but where the hell's my Sirius XM? I need to listen to CNN because that's what, my dad's like almost 70, or maybe he is. I don't know. I can't do math. He's very old. So his idea of great radio is just listening to the CNN television feed, which is a Sirius XM channel. I would argue there are 200 more engaging channels that are formatted for audio that will be a better experience for you. But that's his channel, and that's what a little bit of Shade 45 too. My dad's a bit of a gangster. But those are his channels. So he, it was sort of gratifying that he came to me and said, look, I need this in my car. This is the one thing I don't have. Otherwise, I'm very happy. And it wasn't a hard process. I obviously could get him in on my company account. But for anyone else, it's pretty much as easy as opening the app on your phone. And if you already have an account from your previous car, making sure it's all set to go. And if you don't, setting up a free trial and, whether it's 14 days or 30 days, you're in a good spot to see if that works for you. And if it works for you, you can continue. And if it doesn't work, look, we're going to miss you a lot, but hopefully it works.
Fair enough. Well, I really appreciate that. So maybe Tesla will send you a free car with Sirius XM in it. You never know.
Yeah, they'll send me the first one, I'm sure. I'll just be waiting, and then I got to figure out where to plug it in a condo in downtown Toronto. That'll be my first issue.
That or a DeLorean for sure. So when we talk about Sirius XM and we talk about all these different platforms and apps that we have, I mean, I think one of the competitors for you guys is Spotify.
Yep.
So walk me through, and I don't have Spotify, I don't have Sirius XM. If I'm gonna get one of these things tomorrow, why Sirius XM?
So that's a great question. And look, I will admit, I pay for Spotify. I use it because I'm the senior producer of podcasts. It won't surprise you to know I'm crazy about podcasts, right? Like there is, and I won't get too specific, but let's just say there's some nice chaps in the UK who do a hilarious wrestling podcast, and I listen to them religiously. I would very much like them to join the SiriusXM family, but that's not up to me. But look, I understand for the people who want that experience. What I would tell you is, there's a big difference between. I think what Spotify is and what it does well is it aggregates a lot of content. And to be fair, a lot of our podcasts, Peter Mansbridge and Bob McCowan, who I mentioned, you can get them on Spotify. So even if you're not willing to pay, you still have access to some level of SiriusXM content. You're not going to get me because I don't give my stuff away. That's not what I do. And also they won't let me. But no, I'm kidding. But so yeah, so it's there. You can get the free content. You can build a very nice playlist. You can save it. You can take it with you. But when you get SiriusXM, you have, depending on your package, because the channels will vary, but you're getting a mix of talk programming, live sports, music, and there are, through our relationship with Pandora, we do have those curated shuffle channels. But I'll tell you, one of the things I love to do, and to be fair, this is because the company gave me a Google Home a couple Christmases ago. I have a Google Home, and I can only do this when my wife's not home, otherwise this will annoy her way too much. But I can yell at it and say, well, not yell at it, at a pretty regular voice. I can say, and I won't say it all because then it's going to go off during this interview. Basically, hey, you know what? I want to listen to Alt Nation. And what I'll get is not just a lot of alt rock, that's my genre that I love, but I get a host who, and it's a variety of hosts, but a bunch of hosts who I really like and respect, some of which I know through working with SiriusXM, some I don't. And they have, music on Discovery, where Alt Nation is one of those channels, which is the first to get that new alt rock track. They even have a diversity initiative where they're giving you diverse artists seemingly every hour. And that curated playlist or curated talk, if that's what you're going for in Canada Talks, for example, it's really, really special. And I think, with the exceptions of the content we do put out as podcasts and collaboration, I was telling you before I got to chat with Tony Khan. He did Hits One, he did me, and then he did a Media Scrum press conference. That press conference has very limited availability. It's primarily, audio after the fact, and, you're going to go on Twitter and see little clips. I had 10 minutes with him where I got to chat with him about whatever I wanted. And the same day, I spoke to Nickelback, and I was able to do an interview, which was my interview. It wasn't the standard, like, oh, I'm the music guy, and here's Nickelback. It was, you know what? I'm 34. One of the last CDs I had was Silver Side Up. I hope you guys are going back to the classics. Even further than that, I want you guys to go back to Worthy to Say. And I did a rendition of how Worthy to Say would work with legalization, which I won't spoil. You'll have to listen to that in the SiriusXM app. And Chad Kroeger started to sing a version that mixed a little bit of the new one and the old song. And it's those organic experiences. And we, because of the brand of SiriusXM, people like Tony Khan, Melanie C from the Spice Girls, I get to interview these people multiple times. And I build up such a relationship with these people. With Mel C, when I finished the interview with her last time when she was in New York, she was asking me about my sister, because I told her the first time I interviewed her about how my sister was a Spice Girls fan and she was an up and coming criminal defense lawyer. And, now she's not up and coming. She's a pretty badass criminal defense lawyer who you don't want to mess with. And she was asking me about that. And those connections, and I came from TSN 1050, where they do have connections in some ways, but I just think it's kind of like Netflix. If you want a little bit more than what's out there, it's like Netflix versus YouTube. If you want a little bit more than what's out there for free, we can give it to you at a pretty affordable price. And now we do have plans where if you're not so interested in the sports, you don't really have to pay for the sports. If you're interested in the sports, we'll give you pretty much all the sports you can throw a stick at, but it is all there for you.
Wonderful. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Today Show, and spicing up our life is Bilal Vakani here from SiriusXM 167. Where can people learn more about you? Are you on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter? What are you on?
I am on Instagram and Twitter at BilalV87. I think you and I were talking before about how focused our industry is on Twitter, right? So a certain level of video content I can get on Instagram. As anybody who posts video on Instagram will know, anything over 59 seconds, it's not happening. So if you want sort of, those extended 1 minute 20, 2-minute clips, you got to go to Twitter at BilalV87. And, speaking of a little bit about myself, I have to speak to my Halton roots, because I know Halton Today is your show.
Yep.
And I was born in Toronto, but, once my family had my little sister, they moved to Oakville. We had to stop off in Burlington, but that's still part of Halton. When I was 5 or so, and from the age of basically 6 to 22, I grew up in Oakville. Went to Sheridan College, also in Halton, and you know, I will say I got to go to high school with Steve Mason, who became a great goalie in the NHL. Who you should really come on your show because you are the master of Halton. And it's a very I will just say it's a very I miss it. It's a very nice place. I'm now very much downtown in the city. I'm not quite in the center of the center, although I was a couple of years ago. Now I'm a little bit on the west end of the city, but it's such a nice place. And I believe there was a provincial election where somebody pointed out my sort of subredding of Halton was legitimately the most affluent in Ontario. And then it kind of clicked in. It's like, that's why everything's nice and there's a Starbucks everywhere. So it's a very nice place to live. And, to raise a family, I don't know if Ontario, you could really top it because, every 5 minutes there's a Starbucks or a grocery store. And it's such a beautiful place. And honestly, I miss it a lot. And yeah, I just wanted to shout out Halton before we ran out of time.
No, I appreciate that. And say, listen, if you want to make an introduction, more than happy to chat with anybody, of course. But you did lead on to this wrestling part, which I want to ask: are you a wrestling fan?
I'll keep this short. I'm a massive nerd. Under this button shirt, I have a wrestling shirt, which I won't bore you with. I love wrestling, right? Like I was a young kid in the Attitude Era, and my wife's a bit of a wrestling fan. And I think part of the thing in the role I'm in now is you want to differentiate yourself, right? Like I spoke to a lot of the people who are on our channel. Mansbridge and Bob McCowan are not going to interview wrestlers. That's not their bag. That's my bag, and that is one of the things that really your passion can really differentiate you, right? Like I was just big upping Halton, and you're right, I got to connect you with James Hinchcliffe and some other great Halton people because I've interviewed some of these people, but like you are the Halton guy. I'm the guy who just has fond memories of Halton. But I think I encourage everybody, like whatever your passion is, pursue it. Like on top of all the stuff I do a wrestling podcast completely as a hobby with a couple of friends, and then I bring people on who I wouldn't necessarily bring on Sirius XM always, but people who are friends of mine who I feel comfortable saying, okay, I want to talk about a pay-per-view for like an hour, half an hour, and let's just hang out. And I've had like 145,000 people listen to my hobby above and beyond like the Sirius XM thing where I'm working with McCowan and Mansbridge who have like in the tens of millions of downloads. But I think if there's only one thing people take away from this interview, pursue your hobbies, right? Like we're all nerdy about something, and I love F1 too. We won't get into that, but pursue them, enjoy them, start a podcast about them. Or if you're not into podcasts, start a Facebook group, like start a group chat, just do something, right? Like I just think those experiences and those joint experiences, they're so special. And it's not proprietary to wrestling. It's whatever you're into, assuming it's not criminal. But, it's just great to share those things. And I've been so lucky where, the only feedback I might get sometime from my bosses is like, don't just interview wrestlers, which is pretty good feedback. Because if I did that, I would alienate 99.9% of people. But other than that, I have been so encouraged by my coworkers at SiriusXM Canada to do the big interviews. And if anything, they usually step away from when I mention the numbers I do on those, the Tony Khan interviews, where a company like AEW, which has 1 million Twitter followers, would be like, we'll retweet that. That's amazing you talked to Tony Khan. And they seem to like me. They'll step away and say, damn, that wrestling stuff's pretty popular. Don't do it all the time. That's pretty popular, Bilal. And that's good enough for me. And I implore everybody to find I wouldn't even say niche, find your passion, make it as much a part of your life as you can.
I have time for one more question for you, Bilal. What makes you smile?
Pretty much everything. I'm a very positive guy, except when my wife watches a show I don't like, and then I eviscerate it. But I when she tells me to stop, I do stop generally. But I try to find the joy in everything I do. I worked with a couple of guys in the International Sports Report very early in my career. It was the first regular gig I had at TSN 1050, and I won't try to do a New Zealand accent, but basically, this former rugby player who's still a friend of mine to this day, he basically told me, like, we're all kind of doing the same thing, but if you can have some fun while you do it, like, that's it. Like, if you can joke around a bit, if you can smile, and somebody else along the way, and I'm probably taking this from somewhere else, basically said, if you have fun, everybody else, or at least some portion of people, is going to have fun with you. And, I'm a big proponent in all that. I'm not someone who's super controversial. More often than not, I'm the nice guy who comes in, is very knowledgeable about most of the things I'm talking about, and I will work in a joke here or there. And typically, what I see is those big name guests, a lot of which I alluded to, will turn around and say, "That's actually pretty cool. I want people to check out the interview I did with Bilal." And, we are but two humble Canadians. When we have big name US guests, if they can amplify us, I think that's the best case scenario, because, you and I will probably put roughly the same amount of work into everything we do, but it's working smart and well, I guess we work hard anyways, but more smart than hard, and finding that sweet spot of, taking a discussion and saying, this little clip is what I think the other person would like to share from our discussion, and giving them, in giving them my platform, they're giving me their platform. And I think that sort of collaborative approach has really been what sets me apart, and does make me happy, because, anytime Duff Goldman or John Shannon or any of these guys retweet something I do to 160,000 followers, I'm like, oh, well, I had a nice time talking to them. And now more people might smile or learn about this person's book or this person's TV show. And I think ultimately that's like all we can aspire to in our industry.
100%. That's wonderful. Listen, that's the time that we've had for our show. I'm your host, Christopher Power, on the Today Show. Our guest, Bilal Vakani from SiriusXM channel 167. Remember to have a fantastic day and smile to inspire. Thank you.